In today's episode of AI for the Rest of Us, we're joined by Nathen Harvey, who leads the DORA research program at Google Cloud. For over a decade, DORA has studied how technology driven teams improve software delivery, culture, and organizational performance. Nathan brings deep experience from DevOps and community building into the world of AI, connecting research on culture, trust, and delivery with the new challenges of AI adoption. We'll explore what leaders can do to foster real impact beyond just hype. AI for the Rest of Us is a thriving community of over 1,000 AI explorers. Join us for our 2-day conference on October 15th and 16th in London. We promise inspiring and practical talks without all the jargon. For our listeners, you can use the code LIVE25 for 25% off the ticket price. Now, let's get into the episode with Nathen. Nathen, welcome to the AI for the Rest of Us podcast. For people who don't know you, can you just tell me really quickly about who you are, what you do, and where you work?
Yeah, for sure. First, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here. As you mentioned, my name is Nathen Harvey. I run DORA at a company called Google Cloud, which you might have heard of. You might not have heard of DORA, but I hope you've heard of Google Cloud at least.
And for people that aren't familiar with DORA, could you explain briefly what it is and what type of work you and your team focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. So DORA is a research program that's been running, well, for over a decade now. And this research program is really about how do technology-driven teams and organizations improve. And what might they improve? Well, DORA has kind of a center of gravity around software delivery performance, but we look at lots of other things. So what my team does every year is we go out and we run a survey. We try to collect information from organizations around the world, organizations of every shape and size in every industry and so forth. We really want to get a sense of how are technology teams operating today. We use insights from that survey and we augment them with qualitative interviews that we're able to do with practitioners and leaders that are out in the field putting technology to work for them. And we use this to understand exactly how teams are working and to start to assess sort of what teams are really excelling and what are the differences between those teams that are doing really well versus those teams that, well, have a lot of opportunity to improve. The research itself is technology or platform agnostic. So, although I work for Google Cloud, this isn't research into how do you get better on Google Cloud. It's really, like I said, agnostic in terms of platforms, and we look at things beyond just technology. Of course, we look at technical practices and capabilities that you might have, but we're also looking at how does process work within your organization, and most importantly, what is the culture like within your organization. So each year we publish a report and many other research articles throughout the year. So that's really what I focus on is driving that research and building and supporting a community of practitioners and leaders and researchers around that research.
And you mentioned the aspect here of culture. In your experience, you've been deeply involved in DevOps and community building for years. And when we're thinking about, the new approach, towards AI, the cultural changes that are involved there, how is that journey that you've had with DevOps? How is that influencing what you're doing right now when it comes to AI and software delivery?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about having a research program that's been running for so long is we can see patterns and we see patterns repeating themselves. Culture is one of those things that has kind of underpinned success throughout the research study. We've seen culture help drive things like security practices. A few years ago, we found that the teams that have the best security practices, culture was the number one predictor for those teams. And I think we're going to see very similar patterns with artificial intelligence. It really comes down to sort of the culture of your organization. How do things like incentives work in your organization? As a great example, right now there's such a big push across so many organizations. Thou shalt use AI. And that's great. Like, yeah, maybe there's this new technology. We should use it. We should understand where it works and where it doesn't. But sometimes the edicts end with "Thou shalt use it," and maybe that's not sufficient. Necessary, but not sufficient.
Now, your keynote is titled Navigating the Generative AI Revolution in Software Development. What do you see as the most fundamental shift that Gen AI is bringing to how software is built?
That's a great question. I think that, as an industry or as a profession, we've been so focused on using Gen AI to do exactly what you said, build software. The reality is that building software is super important and it is a big part of what we do. But it's not the only thing that we do. Once that software has been built, maybe it runs on your laptop. Great, but that doesn't help any users. How do we get that information? How do we get that technology, that software into production where users can actually interact with it? This is a big question, and this is where frankly, I see a lot of friction still in a software delivery process. And so I think the way that AI is changing how we build software is it's allowing us as individuals or as teams of engineers to build things faster, to run more experiments, to try out different ways of solving a problem. But it's really important that we also use AI throughout or consider the rest of our software delivery process and practices and make sure that we're also streamlining and improving those so that they can keep up with this potentially new onslaught of more and more code coming through our pipelines.
And with that too, because you mentioned, this sort of edict-based approach of thou shalt do AI, organizations are feeling a lot of pressure when it comes to, adopting AI quickly, in some cases, maybe even too quickly. Based on your research, what capabilities do leaders need in place before scaling adoption?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think one of the most important and critical things that we've seen is that an organization must have a clear and well communicated stance on how they're using AI within the organization. In fact, our research doesn't really look into or care about what that stance is other than that it's clear and well communicated. We see in our surveys and through our qualitative interviews, we run into engineers all the time who are a little bit hesitant or reticent to use AI because they aren't sure what the policy is within their organization, or they aren't sure exactly how their organization is using these AI tools. And understanding that sort of frees and enables developers to play with it more, to experiment more, to use it different ways. So I think if I could say just one thing that you need to have in place, it is that a clear and communicated stance. Now, a quick second place to that, if I could have two, is that we need to give engineers, practitioners, technical professionals time and space to experiment. The reality is, as you know, Bart, there are new tools, new workflows, new versions of models that are being released seemingly daily, right? In fact, I think a new framework was just released this morning. I don't know. But if we rush to standardize on the tools that are available too quickly, we're going to miss out on some of this innovation that's continuing to happen. And so it really is a time of great experimentation and learning for many, many organizations. I think it's really important to not forget that.
And in terms of things that came up in your findings, trust was a critical issue. So how can teams foster in AI systems that outputs both among developers and across leadership that really bring this element in there? Because the distrust around, like you said, people being hesitant, people being reticent, is this going to take my job? Are we going to be, vibe coded out of existence? These sorts of things that come in there. So tell me more about trust and how that affects, developers and leaders.
Yeah. So when we look into trust, one of the questions that we ask is how much do you trust the output of what the AI is giving you? And what we see year in and year out, and we've looked at this for 2 years now. Last year, I think we saw something like 40% of our respondents last year had little or no trust in the output. This year, that number has gone down, but it's still a significant 30% of our respondents have little or no trust in the output of AI. Frankly, I think this is a good thing, right? I think that 100% trust in the output is probably the wrong thing. 0% trust, also the wrong thing. Somewhere in the middle, there's the right answer. And the reality is that as workflows and tools and models and our ways of working with them all continue to change and evolve, that Goldilocks, that happy medium, is always changing as well. So I think we need to embrace that and think about exactly what you said. How do we build that trust? And beyond things like an acceptable use policy or how we're using it within our organization, I think the other thing that's really important is that as teams and organizations, we kind of double down on fast feedback, right? We need to understand and have ways to test, does this code do what I expect it to do? Now, that fast feedback might come through stronger code reviews, it might come through automated testing, etc. So there's lots of different ways to do this, but I think really considering how quickly can I get feedback on the changes that AI has proposed is really important. Beyond that, I think that there are also things like stronger version control practices and one of the classics, working in small batches, right? Making small changes is always faster and safer than making large scale changes. So if we can stay focused on those practices and those sort of conditions and capabilities, I think we'll be better off.
And Nathan, you talk about paradoxes around perceived value versus actual outcomes. Can you share a concrete example of how organizations might measure true impact of AI adoption?
Yeah, for sure. I think first and foremost, we have to be careful with measuring true impact. I think that a lot of organizations right now are simply focused on measuring adoption. And I want to be very clear, adoption is not the same as impact. Certainly, you need to adopt these new tools and new technologies before you can expect them to have any real impact on your business. But the reality is that adoption alone is not enough, right? Just because we've adopted doesn't mean that we're getting real impact on our business. And so I think it is really important though that we understand, like, first and foremost, answering the question of what is true impact? Like, what actually matters? What do we actually care about? And there, I think we're going to come to understanding that, well, we care about our users' experience. We care about maybe, I don't know, maybe we're an e commerce site, right? Maybe we care about the revenue that we're getting or the number of items that a customer is placing into their cart. Whatever those business metrics are for your organization, that's what really matters. And we need to think about how can AI or really any technology help us drive towards those business outcomes. And then I think as an organization, it's really important that we visualize those metrics together, right? If we're thinking about software delivery performance metrics as an engineering team, that's great. And we can see, for example, our deployment frequency increasing. But if we don't also see those business metrics, user satisfaction, revenue, profit also increasing, we can recognize that there's a disconnect between what we're doing from a technology perspective and what our business goals are. So seeing those things together is really important.
And looking ahead, what practical, actionable strategies can teams implement right now to make sure their AI transformation delivers sustainable value rather than just falling into short term hype?
Yeah, I'll pull out one of the things that we've announced or will be announcing, depending on when you're listening to this, in the 2025 DORA report, which will be called the State of AI Assisted Software Development. We have an entire chapter on value stream management there. And really, it's a very simple question, I think, for your team. Can your team go to the whiteboard and draw your software delivery process all the way from an idea through to a customer saying, thank you for shipping this idea? Draw that out. As a team, when you draw that out on a whiteboard, you build out this map. Invariably, you're going to find friction points. You're going to find handoffs that maybe are unnecessary, handoffs that introduce delays, that slow things down, that don't actually provide value. These are the things that we can look to eliminate or start using AI to improve. And I can virtually guarantee that your biggest bottleneck, your biggest constraint is not going to be the speed with which you write code or the quantity of code that you write. So it is really important to look at where else throughout that software development lifecycle can we leverage technologies like artificial intelligence.
And before we wrap up, are there any resources when it comes to books, blogs, podcasts that you've used that have been, helpful and you think other people should take a look at?
Yeah, I think that there's so much across the internet. I try to just stay connected. I think conferences like AI for the Rest of Us is a great thing for all of us to connect on and get to meet others that are going through this journey with us together. And of course, as a member of and sort of advocate for the Dora community, I think this is a good place to be as well. You can get there at Dora.community.
Fantastic. What's next for you, Nathan?
What's next for me? As of this recording, we haven't yet released the 2025 DORA report, although that's coming out very, very soon, maybe by the time you're listening to this. So, what's next for me is taking that report sort of on the road. One of the most important parts of our research cycle is sharing our results with the broader community and getting feedback and input from them. And that's the piece that I get really excited about. Writing research is awesome. but research that sits on the shelf doesn't really do anyone any good. I like to see research put into practice, and I'm really excited to see reactions to this year's research and how are teams going to leverage it in their own work on the daily.
And if people want to get in touch with you, Nathan, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, probably the best way is to find me on LinkedIn. And if you search for my name, thanks, Dad. He kind of misspelled my name. So it has a unique spelling. It's Nathen Harvey, Harvey. So if you search for me, just misspell my first name, just like my dad did, and I'm sure I'll pop right up.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time today. Look forward to seeing you in the conference soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Bart.